Pilot trainees, when they start, will obviously be working to the core surgical training committee, advisory committee's curriculum, which the GMC approved this year and is now in place. In that curriculum, the approach to assessment is the tried and tested one. Workplace-based assessments, the exam, the learning agreements with appropriate education supervisor report and ARCP process. If you break these down a bit, I think we can probably put the exam to one side, because interestingly, an awful lot of the IST applicants, and indeed, in fact, many core applicants have jolly nearly taken MRCS by the time they put up for it. They've certainly done Section A. So we'll just put the exam to one side. What we want to try and do with the workplace-based assessments within the pilot is to use them in a more intelligent way than we have hitherto. We have been stuck with a tick box, and we've had trainees saying, I'm due my ARCP, can you complete these half a dozen WBAs that you haven't signed off yet or I haven't submitted to you? The intention is, and this is what I know Craig has been trying to do with the faculty group, is to encourage a much, much more robust or regular approach. Robust seems a bit strong, but a regular approach between trainer and trainee, and this is a fundamental component to the whole project, that the relationship between trainer and trainee is such that learning agreements are set and progress is assessed on a very regular basis. It doesn't mean that you've got to be on them all the time, but it's this issue around formative assessment with appropriate reflection within the learning agreements. What the intention is that for these trainees, and this is why we've gone for the amount of PAs within the time that the supervisors should have in the pilot, that it allows the trainers to meet with them on a regular basis and set 2 to 3 or 4 week program targets and look at and see what they've accumulated, what they've achieved in that period of time, with a mixture of the established workplace-based assessments, so there is very close feedback and fine-tuning to make sure they're getting what is expected and what they want to develop as they work their way through. Some of this is very much to make sure they're on track, because unfortunately, as you well know, what's happened in a lot of circumstances, people don't have that sort of relationship, and as a consequence, these issues are not necessarily being picked up until quite late during an attachment. And so we are encouraging the faculty to make sure that these regular meetings are part and parcel of day-to-day activity. The reflective feedback is something that is education speak, and you may think, well, what does that achieve? I come round to the view that it's very much what we do week in, week out as professionals, and it's encouraged that and indoctrinating that so that it is appreciated by the trainees. This is something that they should be learning from. What went well? What could I have done better? What have I learned? I realised I should have said something slightly different to the patient, for example. And I think there's something here, we've got an opportunity potentially, and this is something that's evolving in the bigger field of assessment, of trainee self-assessment. In one of the groups we had, it must have been about 4 or 5 months ago, with the stakeholders, and this was with the lay stakeholders. The lead lay stakeholder in one of the academy groups, the training forum, is a teacher, and he assesses trainee teachers sitting in the back of classrooms and seeing how they perform. And the message that came through from him was actually the self-assessment by the trainee was far more useful for them to get an understanding of where they think they should be or where they think they are, and then you as a trainer can modify that or advise or comment on it. And I think this is an opportunity to try and build that in to these processes of assessment. And that's why I think when we have the assessment conversation later on today, it's picking up those things that you think will be helpful. And my view on the whole program is it's a dynamic process, and we'll be picking up stuff as we go along to learn from each other. And I think these will actually improve the learning assessment process from a formative point of view, which will then feed into the reports that obviously are meant to be produced by the end of each attachment and then going through into ARCP. Far be it from me to prejudge the ARCP review report, but there is no doubt that there's going to be a shift in some emphasis such that, although you can't use the word interim, but a mid-course correction of an ARCP will be probably something that's going to come in place. And so you've got the opportunity to look at things in a similar way to the way you look at the evidence of an ARCP, and this can be done halfway through an attachment. Now, not only will this allow you to work out that they are achieving what you want to do from the learning agreements, it also will allow you to pick up the fact, and probably this will be more the case in the second year of the pilot, of what we hope is that they're gaining competencies of the first 2 years more quickly. And so you're picking that up, and then you can encourage them to draw down from the third year of higher training in general surgery. So it's that much closer set of observations that are important. You will be well aware that the process of assessment in training is changing in the context of the standards that the GMC have set in Design for Excellence, their new set of standards. And we at the minute can't use these in the pilot because we're working to the core surgical training curriculum that the GMC have approved. The general surgery curriculum is currently with the regulator, and the team are going to meet with the regulator in early January to discuss some of their reservations about the existing general surgery curriculum. Although I know Gareth Griffiths, my successor, has some reservations that it may not be approved by August to go into place, I'm not sure the GMC can afford to do that because they've got both from us, general surgery, cardiothoracic surgery and ENT surgery for approval. And I think in the light of the process and the progress they wish to make, I would be fairly optimistic in making the assumption that the new general surgery curriculum, based upon the outcomes process, is likely to be approved with some modifications. There is some work to be done on that. But it's based upon outcomes, and there's generic ones, which are the task anybody has to do, and hence the generic professional capabilities, and then the specialty modifications based upon what's been termed capabilities in practice. GMC is making an awful lot of play about the introduction of generic professional capabilities across all assessments within training. Some of this is a reflection of what's being talked of as the transferability agenda, whereby you can pick up skills and take them along with you, and that's particularly the case if you're changing between some specialties. But it's also because of the importance with regard to fitness to practice that the GMC is putting such weight on this that they're putting the similar priority as we do for knowledge and skills. It's in ISCP. If you go to the back end, you'll find professional skills and judgment and leadership, but it's the level of emphasis that's being changed. Now, because the existing core curriculum has been approved, as I say, we can't use these principles of outcomes-based assessment yet, but we're doing a pilot. This is new. Why shouldn't we start thinking about including them? And after all, if the general surgical curriculum is approved come August, you will have people who are beginning to draw down on it in the second year, perhaps, of the pilot, so they will be assessed by the outcomes-based principle. So in other words, in preparation for moving on in the first cohort moving on in 2020, they should therefore be getting to the stage of being assessed against the new curricular requirements. Therefore, the faculty needs to understand what's involved. The standards are in 5 themes. The top 2 are the newish ones. The first one is something that's been a contentious one, whereby they're looking at a curriculum to determine whether it meets what the service needs and what the workforce requirements are. And that's the big challenge that we're all facing across any curricular development. The second theme is to make sure we've assessed stakeholder input to make sure they're going to deliver it. 3 and 4 are those things that we know are in curriculum. It's the assessment principle. It's being considered as a program. So in other words, not just one entity, it's the totality of what you're doing to make sure that the trainee is learning the outcomes that are defined in the curriculum, with defined levels of performance and progression, and the definition of progression points, core into higher, and different parts of higher. And it's making sure that it's a total picture rather than this problem with the tick box exercise. And the big emphasis here is on global judgment. All trainers have a very well-developed professional skill in recognizing whether an individual is making progress. And you can make that judgment without necessarily having dozens and dozens and dozens of workplace-based assessments. Global assessment is already in many of the workplace-based assessments as part of that process. But the whole point about the outcomes is the curriculum defines those outcomes that a trainee should have by the time they reach CCT, and they will build on that as they work their way through, and trainers will be expected to look at the totality of what the trainee is demonstrating. And that means building in the GPCs as well as the standard knowledge and technical skills that we have in surgery. Yes, you will need to continue to have some of the existing workplace-based assessments, but in a much more formative way. The problem with some of these assessments, however, is making sure they're robust, because this is going to be quite a lot of subjectivity here. And the reports, the educational supervisor reports, will be what the ARCP bases the recognition the trainee is ready to move on. And that requires several bits of evidence from several observers. And although that says consultant, when I presented this at DMEC last week, I was called over the coals by saying it should not just be doctors. And that's right, it shouldn't. There's a whole variety of people that trainees come into contact with who will be able to give advice or give observations about a trainee's progression. And that's where the multiple consultant or multiple senior peer review feedback comes in. We've talked a bit about patient feedback, and we may come back to that, but it's a difficult one at the moment. And to get some of the evidence to go into the global overview, you will still need to have the workplace-based assessments, but as I say, not quite in the detail we've had so far, to get round that burden of, oh, we've got to do 40. No, you will know that an individual is making progress in a certain direction, but the workplace-based assessments have some detail, particularly around the procedures, where there's technical detail that need to be assessed. So it builds into what's the competence progression that we have argued are fundamental to the development and the way in which trainees can move their way through the pilot. And as a consequence, the expected structured report, and I think this is where this comes in from what we expect of the faculty to be aware of what they should include in their report, both at the end of placement and at the end of the year. So it gives the ARCP, the ARCP panel, the evidence it needs to make the necessary assessment. And as you know from what we are demonstrating with the run-through, the ARCP, certainly at the end of the second year, is going to be crucial. And in part of the conditions set by the GMC, they are making that as an absolute necessity, that that's as good as it can be for a patient safety point of view. So that somebody can be seen to be moving through from ST2 to ST3 in general surgery, and they're equivalent to those who've gone through uncoupled training. With what we put into the pilot, the supervisors should have the appropriate resources to do what's necessary and what's required of them, and that's where the training of the faculty we can discuss if Craig doesn't make it. So will it work? We would say it will work. There's a shift in the way in which trainers and faculty are going to be expected to make these assessments, and it's going to rely, I think, on a slightly different approach in the way in which we look at a trainee and say they're making the necessary progress. What GPC does is it gives you a long, long list of different forms of words which have been approved through the regulator that can be used to describe the good bits and the less good bits of a trainee's performance. And by having that sort of consistent approach from a multiple series of bits of evidence, it's likely that the trainer critical comments, which may well happen, will be justifiable and defendable, which is one of the problems that has cropped up with this process. And And it is a probity issue. The worst end of the stick is that we have had approaches with the JCST for details of someone's previous training who's got themselves into a real muddle, into a legal situation, and they want to see some evidence of what's happened to that trainee in the past. So there's a definite probity issue about how these things are signed off, so there's a shift in emphasis there as well.